Over the past month, there have been several incidents that have caused myself and other members of Congress to question the Department of Defense's ability to coordinate effectively with other U.S. agencies. On February 11th, the FAA shut down the El Paso airport and airspace with no warning to local officials, residents, or lawmakers such as myself. The FAA said the airport and airspace would be closed for 10 days, citing special security reasons. As the Southern New Mexicans that I represent woke up to this sudden news, absolute chaos and confusion ensued. The public, myself, and other members of Congress were left in the dark, wondering if there was a more serious threat that we were unaware of, as was originally indicated, which led to widespread speculation and misinformation. After Representative Escobar and I launched a congressional inquiry, the airport quickly reopened, but for multiple days we received conflicting information from the Department of Defense, Fort Bliss officials, DHS, and the FAA as to exactly what had happened. FAA staff told my office the temporary flight restriction was pre-planned, but the FAA administrator instead tweeted that there was an active threat. Then we learned it was related to DoD technology in the hands of Border Patrol after an explanation of shooting down a party balloon. Meanwhile, nearly half of the flights out of El Paso that day were canceled, with thousands of people affected by this incompetence. Overnight, medevac flights were suspended. A similar incident happened only 2 weeks later when the DoD accidentally shot down a CBP drone after CBP failed to notify the department of an ongoing exercise. This led to the FAA issuing a temporary flight restriction over Fort Hancock that still remains in place today. Assistant Secretary Humar, can you explain where exactly the breakdown of communication was between the Department of Defense and the FAA?
Thank you, Congressman, for the question. Over the last 14 months, the department has had several iterations of communications and coordination with the FAA, specifically on the capabilities that you're referencing. Those consultations have to do with the capabilities, the risks, the associated vulnerabilities that can be associated with that system. In respect to the specific instances that happened recently, a lot of that was in lack of coordination with the Department of Homeland Security. Now, I'm happy to report that since that incident, we've been able to streamline a lot more of that coordination. 3 agencies, Department of Homeland Security, Department of War, as well as the FAA, and looking to improve on that process as we move forward.
Well, thank you, Mr. Humar, but let's zone in on that lack of coordination with the Department of Homeland Security. That's what I was looking for. What failed? What was the lack of coordination?
Well, I'd have to defer to the Department of Homeland Security because that's their coordination with the FAA, not ours.
Okay. I want to move briefly now to talk about some of the counter-UAS technology that is being tested. Both these incidents involved counter-drone high-energy lasers, which is technology whose effects on people, the environment, and other U.S. assets aren't completely known yet. I believe this is what the FAA was concerned about and what likely contributed to them issuing these shutdowns and flight restrictions. Reporting suggests that these tests are some of the first known domestic use of a counter-drone laser system conducted outside of a controlled environment. Assistant Secretary Humar, how has the department determined that these types of drones were ready at the time to be tested outside of a controlled environment, and what are the possible risks to civilians and other U.S. assets?
So the high-energy laser system, Congressman, that you're referring to, is something that detects at a very meticulous level whatever aerial threats that can be presented, particularly as they relate to unmanned aircraft systems. So in the case of the incidents that you're talking about that happened in recent weeks, the system worked. It actually took out what it detected could be a potential threat, not mitigating any vulnerabilities or mitigating any vulnerabilities that would be present to larger aircraft or civilian uses of other.
Thank you, Assistant Secretary. And I think that's the important thing, where the coordination has to be in place with the respective agencies, with DHS and FAA. Just what you mentioned, that if there is no imminent threat, especially to commercial airliners, that needs to happen before we shut down international airspace. It's been about a month since Representative Escobar and I sent a letter requesting a specific briefing on this issue and what led to the sudden closure of the El Paso airport. We have not received any response. Is this something you can commit to, a briefing for myself and Congresswoman Escobar?
Congressman, happy to take that back and get back with your office within an appropriate time.
Is that a yes?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.